Jake Morrison walked through the long metallic corridor of the Zanari research ship, with his heart beating fast in his chest. The 22-year-old student from Colorado had always dreamed of studying alien life forms up close, but he never imagined he would end up as the subject of their curiosity instead. The walls around him glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a living heartbeat. Everything here felt strange and foreign, yet somehow familiar in a way he could not explain. He entered the medical bay where Dr. Valera was waiting for him. She was tall and elegant with silvery skin that shimmered under the bright lights. Her 4 eyes blinked independently as she looked at him, and Jake still found that unsettling even after 3 weeks aboard the ship. She had told him this would be a simple health screening. Nothing more than what human doctors did back on Earth, just some blood samples and tissue scans to make sure the different atmosphere and gravity were not affecting his body in harmful ways. Jake sat down on the examination table and rolled up his sleeve. Dr. Valera moved with practiced efficiency, pressing a small device against his arm that hummed quietly as it drew blood. She then moved the scanner over his body, the device creating a 3-dimensional image of his internal structure on the holographic display above them. Jake watched his own skeleton rotate in the air, fascinated by the technology that could see through him so completely. But something was wrong. Dr. Valera had frozen in place, staring at the display with all 4 of her eyes wide open. Her silvery skin had turned almost white, a color Jake had learned meant shock or fear among her people. She touched the controls with trembling fingers and ran the scan again, then again, and again. A younger Zanari scientist named Kesh rushed over to her side. He looked at the display and his skin also paled to that ghostly white color. They spoke to each other in rapid Zanari, their voices rising and falling in a musical pattern that the translator in Jake's ear could not keep up with. Jake felt his stomach tighten with worry. Dr. Valera finally turned to face him. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the tremor beneath it. She asked him when humans first achieved space travel. Jake told her about the moon landing in 1969, and how humanity had only made official contact with alien species about 30 years ago. He asked her what was wrong, why she needed to know this. She asked him how far back human recorded history went. Jake shrugged and said maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years for written records, longer if you counted archaeological evidence. His worry was growing now, turning into real fear. Why were these questions important? What had they found in his blood? Dr. Valera exchanged another long look with Kesh. Then she spoke words that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. She told him that his DNA contained genetic sequences that should not exist in a human being, sequences that marked him as carrying Zanari heritage. Jake laughed because what else could he do? The idea was impossible, ridiculous, insane. He was human, completely and totally human. Both his parents were human. His grandparents were human. His entire family, going back as far as anyone could remember, were all human. There was no way he could have alien DNA inside him, but Dr. Valera was not laughing. She pulled up images on the holographic display, showing him strands of genetic code that meant nothing to his untrained eyes. She pointed to specific sequences and explained that these were markers, identifiers that were unique to Zanari genetics. They were not in the parts of DNA that coded for physical traits or biological functions. They were in the sections that scientists called junk DNA, sequences that seemed to serve no purpose except to be passed down from parent to child unchanged. These markers were like genetic fingerprints that identified someone as belonging to a Zanari bloodline. They were specific and unmistakable and utterly impossible to fake or contaminate. And they were in Jake's DNA, woven into every cell of his body. Jake felt the room spinning around him. He gripped the edge of the examination table to steady himself. He asked how this could be possible. Dr. Valera said that was exactly what they needed to find out. She told him she needed to contact the Galactic Council immediately. This discovery was too important, too unprecedented to keep quiet. Kesh was already working at another console, sending messages across the vast distances of space. Jake sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just learned. Part of him still wanted to believe this was some kind of mistake, a contamination of the samples or an error in the scanning equipment. But he could see the certainty in Dr. Valera's eyes. She was not wrong about this. He thought about his parents back on Earth, his friends, his professors at the university. What would they say when they found out? What would humanity say? He was supposed to be here studying alien biochemistry, writing papers about protein structures and cellular processes. Instead, he had become the biggest scientific mystery in the galaxy. Dr. Valara approached him again, her expression softer now. She told him not to be afraid. They would figure this out together. She said that whatever this discovery meant, he was still Jake Morrison, still the same person who had boarded this ship 3 weeks ago. Nothing had changed except their understanding. But Jake knew that everything had changed. The comfortable certainty of his identity had been shattered. He had always known exactly who and what he was. Human, born and raised on Earth, descended from a long line of humans stretching back through history. Now that certainty was gone, replaced by questions that had no easy answers, he asked Dr. Valara what happened next. She told him that representatives from the Galactic Council would arrive within 2 days. They would want to examine him themselves, verify the findings, and try to understand what this meant. She assured him that he was safe, that no one would harm him. But she also warned him that his life was about to become very complicated. Jake nodded slowly, still trying to wrap his mind around the impossible truth. He was human, but he was also something else, something that should not exist. He carried within him a genetic heritage that connected him to an alien species, across thousands of light years and possibly thousands of years of time. Somewhere in his past, somehow, human and Zanari had mixed in ways that should have been impossible. Dr. Valara left him alone to process the news. Jake sat in the medical bay for a long time, staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. These hands that looked completely human, that had human fingerprints and human bone structure, but inside, at the microscopic level that he could not see, they carried the genetic signature of an alien race. He wondered what his ancestors would think if they could see him now. He wondered which ancestor had been the first to carry this alien heritage, and most of all, he wondered what this discovery would mean for humanity's understanding of itself and its place in the galaxy. The answers would come soon enough. For now, all Jake could do was wait and try to prepare himself for whatever came next. His life as a simple biology student was over. Something new and strange and terrifying was beginning, and he was at the center of it all. The Galactic Council chamber was larger than any building Jake had ever seen on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high above him that it seemed to disappear into darkness. Around him sat representatives from dozens of different alien species, each one stranger than the last. Some had multiple limbs, others floated in tanks of liquid, and a few were simply clouds of glowing particles contained in force fields. Jake stood in the center of it all, feeling incredibly small and human and out of place. Ambassador Linda Hayes stood beside him, her presence a comfort in this overwhelming situation. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had spent the last decade representing Earth in galactic politics. Dr. Gregory Chen was also there, a brilliant geneticist who had been studying alien biology for years. Both of them had reviewed the findings from Dr. Valara's tests, and both had been shocked by what they discovered. Ambassador Hayes spoke first, her voice firm and clear. She stated that humanity had evolved independently on Earth, and that they had fossil records going back millions of years to prove it. The idea that humans carried alien DNA was impossible according to everything they knew about their own history. A tall crystalline being that looked like living glass rose to speak. Its name was Council Member Thrace, and its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Thrace said that the evidence was very compelling and could not be dismissed easily. The genetic markers in Jake's DNA were not recent contamination or laboratory error. They were integrated into his germline, meaning they had been passed down through many generations of his ancestors. Dr. Chen stepped forward with his tablet held up for everyone to see. He said that while there were indeed shocking similarities between human and Zanari genetics, this could still be explained by convergent evolution. Different species sometimes developed similar solutions to similar problems when faced with similar environmental pressures. Perhaps humans and Zanari had simply evolved along parallel paths. Dr. Valara projected a massive hologram into the center of the chamber. Genetic sequences filled the air around them, glowing in different colors. She explained that these were not similar solutions evolving independently. These were identical sequences found in the non-coding regions of DNA, the parts that did not affect physical traits or body functions. The probability of these exact sequences appearing in two species through random chance was essentially zero. These sequences were like a signature, a marker that could only be passed down through direct inheritance. Jake found his voice despite his nervousness. He asked what this meant for him, for humanity, for everything they thought they knew about themselves. An elderly Zanari rose slowly from his seat in the upper gallery. His name was Elder Thon, and his silver skin was marked with intricate dark patterns that showed his great age and wisdom. He moved carefully, as if every step required thought and effort. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent to listen. He told them about an old story from Zanari history, a legend that most considered nothing more than myth. 10,000 years ago, before the Zanari achieved faster-than-light travel, before they joined the community of spacefaring species, there had been a group among them who believed in something called the seeding. These believers thought that Zanari genetic material was too valuable to be confined to a single world. They wanted to spread it across the galaxy, to share it with other developing species. The seeding faction believed they were doing good work, uplifting lesser species and preparing the galaxy for a future where all intelligent life shared common genetic bonds. They built ships and gathered volunteers and prepared to travel to distant primitive worlds. But the Zanari government discovered their plans and was horrified. They saw the seeding as a violation of natural law, an arrogant interference in the development of other species. The government exiled the seeders, sending them away from the Zanari homeworld, with orders never to return. They thought they had acted in time, that they had stopped the plan before it could be implemented. But perhaps they had been too late. Perhaps some of the seeders had already left on their secret mission. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He asked if Elder Thon was saying that someone had genetically modified early humans thousands of years ago. Elder Thon nodded sadly. He said that if the seeders had truly reached Earth, they would have introduced Zanari genetic material into the existing human population in subtle ways. They would not have tried to change humans completely, but rather added possibilities to the genetic code. Most of these additions would have been bred out over time through natural selection, because they provided no survival advantage. But some sequences, especially in the non-coding regions, could persist for thousands of generations without causing any harm. Ambassador Hayes stood very still, and Jake could see anger building in her expression. She asked if they were being told that humanity's entire evolutionary history had been tampered with, that humans were some kind of alien experiment. Dr. Valara spoke quickly to clarify. She said it would not have been an experiment in the traditional sense. The seeders would not have tried to control or manipulate human development. They would have simply added their genetic material to the gene pool and let natural processes take over. Humans would have continued to evolve naturally. With the vast majority of Zanari sequences being lost over time, only a few would remain, hidden in the parts of DNA that scientists once called junk. Dr. Chen asked the question that Jake had been wondering. Why did Jake have active markers when most humans presumably did not? Why was his Zanari heritage so much stronger than it should be after 10,000 years of human breeding? Dr. Valara admitted she did not know. That was the mystery they needed to solve. Standard genetic drift should have diluted the Zanari sequences to nearly undetectable levels by now. The fact that Jake carried such strong markers suggested something unusual in his family history. Something that had preserved and perhaps even concentrated the alien DNA through the generations. A reptilian delegate from a species called the Korthax spoke up, its voice hissing through the translator. It asked how many humans might carry these hidden Zanari markers. Was this just one isolated case, or was it widespread? Dr. Chen said they were running preliminary scans of human genetic databases, but it would take time to analyze billions of people. Early results suggested that traces of Zanari DNA might be present in a small percentage of the population, perhaps 2 or 3%. But most of these would be tiny fragments, barely detectable. Jake's level of Zanari heritage was unprecedented. Jake listened to all of this with a growing sense of unreality. They were talking about him, about his DNA, about his ancestors, but it felt like they were discussing someone else entirely. He looked down at his hands again. Those ordinary human hands that apparently carried the genetic legacy of an alien species from across the galaxy. Elder Thon approached Jake, moving slowly down from the gallery. He stopped in front of the young human and looked at him with eyes that held both sadness and wonder. He said that Jake represented something that should not exist according to Zanari law and human understanding, but he also represented a bridge between two species, a living connection across thousands of years and light years of distance. The council debated for hours about what to do next. Some called for extensive testing and research. Others wanted to search for more humans with Zanari heritage. A few suggested trying to find records or remnants of the Cedar mission that might still exist somewhere in the galaxy. Through it all, Jake sat and listened and tried to understand what his life had become. Finally, Ambassador Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder. She told him that regardless of what they discovered about his genetics, he was still a citizen of Earth and humanity would stand by him. She said that this discovery did not change who he was as a person, only what they knew about where he came from. But Jake wondered if that was really true. Could he still be the same person when everything he thought he knew about his identity had been turned upside down? He was human, but he was also Zanari. He belonged to Earth, but also to a heritage that stretched across the stars. He was one person caught between two worlds, and he had no idea which one was truly home. Jake sat alone in his quarters on the station called Harmony 7, staring at the walls without really seeing them. The meeting with the Galactic Council had ended hours ago, but his mind was still racing with everything he had learned. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his communicator and wondered if he looked different now that he knew the truth. He felt different, like something fundamental had shifted inside him even though logically nothing had changed at all. His communicator chimed and his mother's face appeared on the screen. Patricia Morrison looked worried, her eyes searching his face for signs of how he was handling all of this. She said she had been watching the news broadcasts and asked if he was all right. Jake tried to smile for her, but it felt forced and awkward. He asked her if there had ever been anything unusual about their family history, anything strange or unexplained that she could remember. Patricia frowned and thought, her fingers tapping against her chin the way they always did when she was trying to recall something. She said that his father's side of the family had always been somewhat mysterious. His great-grandfather Henry had been found as an orphaned child with no records of who his parents were. Jake leaned closer to the screen. He asked where Henry had been found and when. Patricia said it was somewhere in Montana back in the 1920s, near some old sites that had belonged to Native American tribes. She remembered hearing family stories about strange lights in the sky that year, though people at the time had dismissed them as ball lightning or falling meteorites. She asked why he wanted to know. Before Jake could answer, the door to his quarters opened and Dr. Valera entered along with Dr. Chen and Elder Thon. Jake quickly told his mother he would call her back later and ended the connection. He stood up to greet his visitors, feeling nervous about what new revelations they might bring. Elder Thon carried a small device that projected holographic images into the air. He said they had been researching Earth's historical records, looking for patterns and reports of unusual phenomena. He activated the device and a map of Earth appeared, floating above his hand. Glowing points of light were scattered across the continents, marking specific locations. These points represented documented sightings of unexplained objects in the sky between the years 1850 and 1950 according to Earth's calendar. The reports came from many different sources and cultures, from farmers and sailors and explorers who had no reason to lie or exaggerate. Elder Thon pointed out that the sightings were not random, but clustered in specific areas. One of those clusters was in Montana, exactly where Jake's great-grandfather had been found. Dr. Chen explained that they had cross-referenced these locations with genealogical databases, tracing families that originated from or lived near these areas. The analysis was still incomplete because it required examining millions of records, but preliminary results were striking. Approximately 3% of Earth's current population appeared to carry dormant Zanari genetic markers. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. 3% meant over 200 million people worldwide, all of them walking around not knowing they carried alien DNA inside them, all of them living normal human lives while genetic secrets from another species hid in their cells. Dr. Valera was quick to add that most of these people carried only trace amounts, tiny fragments that would never have any noticeable effect. The markers were so diluted after generations of human breeding that they were barely detectable even with advanced scanning technology. But Jake was different. His genetic profile showed that nearly 12% of his DNA contained Zanari sequences. This was an extraordinarily high concentration that should not exist. After so many thousands of years, Jake asked what that meant. Dr. Valera said it suggested that his ancestor was not merely exposed to Zanari genetic material, but was likely a direct hybrid, someone who was half human and half Zanari, Such a hybrid would have had a much higher concentration of alien DNA to pass down through the generations. Elder Thon spoke again, his voice soft and thoughtful. He said that the Seeders had been fanatics who believed deeply in their mission, but they had not been cruel or evil people. If they truly wanted to help humanity evolve and grow, they might have created hybrids as part of their plan. These hybrids would have looked mostly human on the outside, enough to fit into human society without raising suspicion. But inside they would have carried substantial amounts of Zanari genetics. Dr. Chen connected the pieces. He said that Jake's great-grandfather Henry, found as a child with no known parents near a location where strange lights were seen, fit the pattern perfectly. Henry might have been one of these hybrids, a child born of both human and Zanari heritage. He would have appeared human enough to be accepted into human society, and over the years any small differences would have been forgotten or dismissed. Jake tried to imagine it. His great-grandfather as a small boy, alone and confused, not understanding why he was different or where he came from. Growing up thinking he was fully human, never knowing the truth about his origins. Meeting Jake's great-grandmother, having children, starting a family line that would eventually lead to Jake himself. And through all those generations, the Zanari DNA had been passed down, stronger in Jake than it had been in anyone else for reasons they still did not fully understand. Ambassador Hayes arrived then, entering the quarters without knocking. She looked tired and stressed, but her voice was firm when she spoke. She told Jake that regardless of what his genetic test showed, he was human by every definition that mattered. He had been born on Earth, raised by human parents, educated in human schools. Earth was his home and humanity was his people. The Zanari heritage he carried did not change those fundamental facts, but Elder Thon disagreed gently. He said that Jake was both human and Zanari, not one or the other. He was something new, something that neither species had seen before. He represented the fulfillment of what the Seeders had dreamed about, even if they had been wrong to pursue their dream without permission. Jake was proof that the boundaries between species were not as absolute as everyone believed. The elder approached Jake and placed a 3-fingered hand on his shoulder. His skin was cool and smooth, nothing like human skin, yet the gesture felt comforting. He said that Jake was a bridge between two peoples, a connection across vast distances of space and time. He carried within him the heritage of both worlds, and that made him precious to both. Jake felt tears building in his eyes. He asked what he was supposed to do with this knowledge, how he was supposed to live knowing he was not entirely human. Elder Thon said that Jake would have to find his own path forward, but he would not have to walk it alone. Both humans and Zanari would support him as he learned what his mixed heritage truly meant. Dr. Valera suggested they begin more detailed testing to understand the full extent of Jake's Zanari DNA and what effects it might have on his body and mind. There could be abilities or traits that had not yet manifested, things that might only appear under certain conditions or with proper training. Jake agreed, though part of him was frightened about what they might discover. Over the following days, Jake underwent extensive examinations. The scientists scanned every part of his body, analyzed his blood and tissue samples, and mapped his entire genetic code in detail. They found that his Zanari DNA was not clustered in one area, but distributed throughout his genome, woven into the fabric of his being at the most fundamental level. Dr. Valera discovered that his regenerative capacity was 40% faster than the average human. Small cuts and bruises healed remarkably quickly, and his immune system showed unusual strength against foreign pathogens. Jake realized this explained why he had rarely gotten sick as a child, why injuries that should have taken weeks to heal had recovered in days. His brain structure also showed differences. Neural pathways in regions associated with pattern recognition and spatial reasoning were denser than normal, more similar to Zanari brain architecture than human. His sensory perception extended beyond normal human ranges in subtle ways. He could hear slightly higher frequencies and see colors in the near ultraviolet spectrum that were invisible to other humans. Jake realized with a start that he had been seeing these extra colors his entire life. He had always assumed everyone else saw them too. Now he understood that his perception of the world was literally different from other humans, that he had been living with Zanari senses without ever knowing it. The testing continued, and with each new discovery, Jake felt himself drifting further from the simple human identity he had always taken for granted. He was becoming something else, something undefined and new, and he had no idea where this transformation would ultimately lead him. The testing continued for weeks, and each day brought new discoveries that amazed the scientists and unsettled Jake in equal measure. Dr. Valara had moved beyond simple genetic analysis and was now exploring what his Zanari heritage actually meant in practical terms. She wanted to know if Jake could do things that normal humans could not, if there were hidden abilities waiting to be awakened. One morning she brought Elder Thon to the laboratory along with a small crystalline device that looked ancient and precious. The crystal was about the size of Jake's palm, clear as glass but with veins of silver light running through its interior. Elder Thon held it carefully, as if it were fragile despite looking solid and strong. He explained that among the Zanari people, those with strong genetic heritage could interface with their ancient technology through something called bioresonance. The technology read genetic signatures and responded only to those who carried the proper markers. It was a way of ensuring that important devices could only be used by verified members of Zanari bloodlines. No human had ever been able to activate such devices because humans lacked the necessary genetic codes. Elder Thon placed the crystal in Jake's hand and stepped back. Jake looked down at it, feeling the cool weight against his palm. Nothing happened at first, and he felt a flutter of disappointment mixed with relief. Perhaps his Zanari heritage was not strong enough after all. Perhaps he was still mostly human despite what the genetic tests showed. Then the crystal began to glow. Soft blue light spread from its center, pulsing in rhythm with Jake's heartbeat. The silver veins brightened and started to move, swirling in patterns that seemed almost alive. Holographic symbols appeared in the air around the crystal, writing in a script that Jake had never seen before but somehow felt familiar. The symbols flickered and shifted, displaying information that he could not read, but could somehow sense on an instinctive level. Dr. Valara gasped and pressed her hands to her chest. She said the crystal was recognizing Jake as Zanari, accepting him as one of their own. The ancient technology was responding to his genetic signature as if he were a pure-blooded member of their species. Elder Thon had tears in his eyes, something Jake had never seen in a Zanari before. The elder said he had never thought he would witness this moment. The Cedars, in their misguided wisdom, had created something beautiful and unexpected. They had made a child of two worlds, someone who could be accepted and recognized by both. Jake stared at the glowing crystal in his hand and felt something stirring deep inside him. It was not quite a thought and not quite a feeling, but something in between. Memories that were not his own flickered at the edges of his consciousness. He saw stars from perspectives he had never experienced. He felt longings for places he had never been. There was a drive to explore, to learn, to reach out and connect with other minds across the vast emptiness of space. He whispered that these were not his feelings, that they belonged to someone or something else. Elder Thon said gently that they were Jake's feelings, but they were also the feelings of every Zanari who had ever lived. The drive to explore and understand and connect was encoded in their genetics at the deepest level. It was what made them who they were as a species. And now it was encoded in Jake as well, passed down through thousands of years from his hybrid ancestor. Word of Jake's ability to activate Zanari technology spread quickly through both human and alien communities. The news broadcast showed his face alongside headlines about the discovery of hidden connections between species. Other humans who had never thought of themselves as anything but ordinary began coming forward, wondering if they too might carry Zanari heritage. Testing centers were set up on Earth and other human colonies to screen for the genetic markers. Most people who tested positive carried only the tiniest traces, fragments so small they had no real effect. But a few had concentrations similar to Jake's, high enough to potentially interface with Zanari technology and exhibit other unusual traits. A support network formed quickly, people reaching out to each other as they tried to understand what their mixed heritage meant for their lives and identities. But not everyone was happy about the discovery. Groups of human activists began organizing protests at government buildings and testing centers. They carried signs saying that humanity's genetic code was sacred, and that the Zanari manipulation was a violation of their sovereignty as a species. They argued that humans should be purely human, not contaminated with alien DNA that had been forced upon their ancestors without consent. On the Zanari homeworld, conservative factions raised similar objections. They said the Cedars had committed a crime against nature by mixing species that should have remained separate. They called Jake and others like him abominations, mistakes that never should have existed. Some demanded that the hybrids be isolated or even have their Zanari genetics removed if possible. Ambassador Hayes stood before the Galactic Council once again, her voice steady despite the growing tensions. She said that humanity faced a choice about how to respond to this discovery. They could view it as a violation and a contamination, letting anger and fear drive their decisions. Or they could see it for what it truly represented, which was proof that the boundaries between species were more flexible than anyone had believed. Life in all its creativity found ways to connect and bridge gaps that seemed impossible. A human senator named Charles Blake spoke in opposition. He was a large man with a red face and an angry voice. He said that learning their evolution had been tampered with undermined everything humans thought they knew about themselves. Their history, their identity, their very understanding of what it meant to be human had all been built on foundations that were now revealed as false. How could they trust anything about their past when such fundamental truths had been hidden from them? Jake found himself standing before the council again, his heart pounding but his voice steady when he spoke. He addressed Senator Blake directly and said that he understood the anger and confusion. He felt it too every single day, but he was still himself despite what his genetic tests showed. He was still the person who had grown up in Colorado, who loved hiking in the mountains, who had chosen to study biology because he wanted to understand the world around him. Learning about his Zanari heritage had not erased his human experiences or memories. It had added to them, expanded them, given him a broader perspective on who he was and who he could become. He turned to address the full council, speaking to humans and aliens alike. He said that perhaps the Cedars had been wrong to do what they did without asking permission first. That was a valid criticism and an important ethical concern, but the Cedars were gone now, dead for thousands of years. The people who remained, people like Jake and the millions of other humans who carried Zanari markers, were not responsible for decisions made by ancestors they had never known. They were here now, living in the present, trying to figure out how to move forward. The choice before them was simple, even if the emotions surrounding it were complex. They could let anger about the past divide them, or they could embrace what the discovery meant for the future. They could build walls between species, or they could build bridges. They could reject the connections that genetics had revealed, or they could celebrate the fact that humans and Zanari were not as different as they had always believed. Jake spoke about the crystal that had glowed in his hand, about the ancient Zanari technology that had recognized him as one of their own. He said it felt like coming home to a place he had never been, like remembering something he had never known. It was strange and unsettling, but also somehow right. He carried two heritages within him, and he was learning that this was not a burden but a gift. The council listened in silence as Jake spoke. Some faces showed sympathy while others showed skepticism or outright hostility, but they all listened, and that was something. When he finished speaking, Elder Thon rose from his seat and began to applaud slowly. Others joined him, first a few and then more, until roughly half the chamber was showing their support. It was not universal acceptance, but it was a start. Jake had spoken his truth, and some had heard it. Now came the harder work of turning words into action, of building the future he had described. He did not know if he was strong enough for what lay ahead, but he knew he had to try. He was a bridge between worlds whether he wanted to be or not. The only question was what kind of bridge he would become. 6 months had passed since the discovery that changed Jake's life, and the Galactic Council had established something called the Heritage Initiative. It was a joint program run by both humans and Zanari to study the genetic connections between their species and to support individuals who carried mixed heritage. The program provided medical care, counseling, and education to help people understand what their Zanari DNA meant for their lives. Jake became the program's first ambassador, a role he had never imagined for himself, but one that felt increasingly natural as time went on. He worked alongside a young Zanari scientist named Dr. Mira, who specialized in cross-species genetics. She was curious and kind, treating Jake as an equal rather than a test subject. Together, they traveled between Earth and the Zanari homeworld called Xenar Prime, giving lectures and meeting with families who were struggling to understand their newly discovered heritage. The work was exhausting, but meaningful. Jake met children who could see colors their parents could not perceive. He spoke with elderly humans who suddenly understood why they had always healed faster than others, or why certain technologies seemed to respond to their touch in unusual ways. He helped families navigate the complex emotions of learning that their ancestry included alien bloodlines they had never suspected. One day, Jake and Dr. Mira traveled to Montana, to the small town where Jake's great-grandfather Henry had been found over a century ago. They brought advanced Zanari scanning equipment that could detect technological remnants buried deep underground. The town had changed over the decades, but the general location was still identifiable from old records. They set up their equipment in a field outside, town where cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. Dr. Mira activated the scanners and watched the readouts carefully. At first there was nothing unusual, just soil and rock and the expected geological layers. Then the scanner detected something that made her breath catch. There was a structure buried nearly 50 meters below the surface, built from materials that did not occur naturally on Earth. It took 3 days of careful excavation using gravity displacement technology to reach the hidden chamber without damaging it. When they finally opened the sealed entrance, stale air rushed out carrying the scent of metal, and something else Jake could not identify. Inside they found a room carved from solid rock, its walls lined with crystalline panels that still glowed faintly after all these years. In the center of the room sat a data storage device, its design clearly Zanari but archaic compared to modern technology. Dr. Mira connected her equipment to it carefully, worried that the ancient systems might fail after so long without maintenance. But the device activated smoothly, projecting a holographic message into the air above it. The hologram showed a group of Zanari, their clothing and appearance slightly different from modern members of their species. They stood together in what looked like a ship's bridge, their expressions serious but hopeful. One of them stepped forward, a female with intricate patterns marked on her silver skin. She identified herself as Historian Vera, leader of the seeding expedition. Her recorded voice was clear despite the thousands of years that separated her time from Jake's. She said that if anyone was viewing this message, it meant their mission had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. She explained that they had been exiled from Xenar Prime for believing that genetic heritage should not be confined to a single world. The Zanari government had called them criminals and heretics, but they believed they were doing necessary work. Vera spoke about isolation and how it led to stagnation. She said they had found Earth after years of searching, a world filled with potential and a species called humanity that stood on the edge of greatness. The Seeders had not wanted to change humans or control them. They had simply wanted to add possibilities to the human genetic library, traits that might prove useful as humanity evolved and grew. The hologram flickered and showed images of the work they had done. They had introduced Zanari genetic sequences into small populations of early humans, living in different parts of the world. They had created hybrids too, children born of both human and Zanari parents. These hybrids had been raised with love and care until they were old enough to survive on their own, then returned to human society to live human lives. Vera's eyes showed both pride and sadness as she explained their reasoning. They had hoped that one day, when both species reached the stars and encountered each other, they would discover their hidden connection. They would see that the galaxy did not have to be a lonely place, that bridges could exist between thinking beings even across vast distances. The message ended with Vera saying that whatever judgment history passed on their actions, they had acted from love rather than malice. They had wanted to fight the loneliness that came from being one species in an infinite universe. They had wanted to prove that life could find ways to connect even when it seemed impossible. Jake and Dr. Mira stood in silence after the hologram faded. Jake felt tears on his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. He understood now what his great-grandfather must have been, one of those hybrid children raised by the Seeders and then left to make his way in human society. Henry had lived his entire life not knowing the truth about his origins, but he had passed that precious heritage down through the generations, until it reached Jake. Dr. Mira said quietly that the Seeders had been wrong to act without permission from either the Zanari government or the humans they modified, but she thought she understood why they had done it. The universe was vast and cold and empty, and any connection between thinking beings was rare and precious. They returned to Harmony 7 with the data device and shared Vera's message with the Galactic Council. The reaction was mixed as expected. Some saw it as proof of criminal arrogance, while others saw it as a misguided but well-intentioned attempt to improve the galaxy. But everyone agreed that the Seeders had succeeded in creating lasting connections between humans and Zanari. The Council officially recognized humans with Zanari heritage as citizens of both worlds, with all the rights and privileges that status provided. It set a precedent that would change how the galaxy thought about species boundaries and genetic identity. If humans and Zanari could share heritage despite evolving on worlds thousands of light years apart, perhaps other unexpected connections existed waiting to be discovered. Jake accepted a position teaching at the new Interspecies Academy, a school where humans and various alien species learned together. His students were young and curious, eager to understand a galaxy that was more complex and interconnected than previous generations had imagined. He taught them about genetics and evolution, but also about the importance of remaining open to unexpected discoveries. One evening, Jake stood on the observation deck of Harmony 7, looking at the stars displayed on the massive view screen. Earth was visible on one side and the distant glow of Xenar's sun on the other. His communicator chimed and his mother's face appeared. Patricia told him that she had been going through old family photos and found pictures of his great-grandfather, Henry. In certain lighting, his eyes showed a faint silver reflection that she had never noticed before. It was subtle, easy to miss, but it was there. She said she thought Henry would have been proud of Jake for bringing two worlds together and making something good from a complicated legacy. Jake smiled and agreed. He touched the crystal pendant he now wore around his neck, a gift from Elder Thon that glowed softly at his touch. It responded to his genetic signature, recognizing him as both human and Zanari, accepting him as he was. Dr. Mira joined him at the observation deck, looking out at the same stars. She asked what he was thinking about, and Jake said he was thinking about bridges, not the physical kind, but the connections between people, between species, between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. He said that identity was not about being one thing or another, but about all the connections a person carried and all the bridges they chose to build. The Seeders had wanted to connect species across the galaxy, and they had thought genetic manipulation was the answer. But the real connection was not in DNA sequences or genetic markers. It was in the choice to understand each other, to accept differences, to build something together despite coming from different worlds. Dr. Mira placed her hand on his shoulder in the Zanari gesture of friendship and solidarity. She said they should keep building then, keep making connections, keep proving that bridges could exist even across impossible distances. Jake agreed, and together they watched the stars. Two species united by ancient design and modern choice. Somewhere in the depths of space, other secrets waited to be discovered. Other messages from the Seeders revealing more about their mission and its effects. But that was a mystery for another day. For now, Jake Morrison stood at the meeting point of two civilizations and looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. The bridge had been built long ago by people he would never meet. Now it was his job and his privilege to walk across it and invite others to follow. The journey was just beginning, and the possibilities were endless.